The left only cares about racism when they can blame white supremacy, and the latest spate of attacks on Asian Americans proves it. You see, for over a year now, there have been heightened attacks on Asian Americans and Asian immigrants. Early on in the coronavirus pandemic, the left liked to blame the fact that Trump properly blamed the Chinese Communist Party for exporting the coronavirus onto the rest of the world. And then, as attacks continued to increase, especially in areas where the police were defunded and where rioters were allowed to run rampant, now they finally have a culprit they can focus on. In Atlanta, there was a lone deranged gunman who specifically targeted Asian-owned massage parlors, killing 8 people, 6 of whom were Asian American and 7 of whom were women. Now, we still don't know the actual motivation, although it does seem that he was specifically targeting Asian American massage parlors based on the stereotype, the sexist and racist stereotype, that all Asian massage workers are actually just sex workers, and the gunman said that he had professed sex addiction. But that didn't stop the left from, shall I say, pouncing. And it's interesting because there is much more to the entire narrative about anti-Asian American discrimination in the last year than they like to admit. For one thing, a large spate of these attacks, the ones that have been technically counted as hate crimes, they have been perpetrated by young black men. Not necessarily because there is an uptick in black racism against Asian Americans, but rather because they've been happening to older and lower income Asian Americans who live in denser urban areas. A lot of these have been happening in historical Chinatowns. The issue? Under-policing. The same movement that called to defund the police in the name of racial justice has left a lot of older Asian Americans in urban areas unsafe. Another area that the left chooses to ignore, perhaps the most blatant form of racial discrimination that we, the taxpayers, fund, anti-Asian discrimination in schools. And no, I'm not just talking about Ivy Leagues. You know how President Biden withdrew President Trump's Justice Department suit investigating Yale for pernicious anti-Asian American bias in their admissions process. But also now in public schools, in K-12 schools. In New York for years, there has been a push to remove the SHSAT, which allows young, extremely low-income Asian Americans to go to the city's most elite specialized public schools. In these schools, Asian Americans or Asian immigrants comprise a majority of the student body. So that's not white supremacy, that's Asian excellence. But they want to get rid of those schools. In San Francisco, where a large spate of these physical attacks have been occurring, the city, which mind you has barely reopened any of the schools, wants to end the admissions practices of Lowell High School. Again, another public school that predominantly serves high-achieving, low-income Asian students. Now, there are as many Latinos as there are white students at Lowell. Asian Americans comprise the majority. But again, you can't let the Asians do too well, right? In any other form, this would constitute an outrage among the left. But they don't care. It's important to combat racism in all of its forms, and when the culprit is white supremacy, we should condemn it. In this case, it's not, and it's telling how silent the left is on this front.